Welcome to the Network podcast. In September, Greenpill will be hosted by the Cartographers, a high context community of individuals and teams dedicated to advancing the Web3 grants ecosystem. They'll explore the Web3 grants ecosystem with topics ranging from novel funding mechanisms, grant councils, and governance to emerging trends like AI and direct to contract incentives. This series seeks to bridge theory and practice by examining real world examples and featuring discussions with those who are closest to the action. The next voice you hear will be Sav, who contributes at Gitcoin and founded the Cartographers. Sav will be hosting this entire season. And I think that it's going to be a great season because Sav brings deep experience in Web3 grants and capital allocation. I'm excited for you to hear some of the perspectives from him and his guests. Without further ado, the next voice you'll hear is Sav. Enjoy.
All right, we are live for the GreenPilled podcast, exploring downstream grant programs across the Superchain. I'm Sav, and I'm here with our guests, Paper and Katie, who serve with me on the Optimism Grant Council. We'll start with some introductions. Katie, I'll pass it over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. My name's Katie Garcia. I am a delegate at Optimism in the Token House. I'm also a badge holder of the Citizens House, and I'm on the Grants Council at Optimism. I'm a Superchain reviewer, and then I'm also a part of the Anti Capture Commission. My other job is as a proprietary investment firm called UDHC. Our basic thing is bridging traditional finance and decentralized finance through early stage startups in crypto. And there's 7 of us, and we all came from the Maker Foundation. So when the Maker Foundation dissolved in 2021, we started our own investment firm. And now we are focused on bridging TradFi and DeFi. And that's my other job. I'm heavily involved at Optimism as well.
Nice. Paper, give you a minute to introduce.
Sure, I'm mostly known as Paperimperium. I am the governance lead at GFX Labs, so I handle our governance affairs at various DeFi protocols and L2 protocols, of which Optimism is a cornerstone of our governance portfolio. We've been around since governance started. We're large delegates. We have served on the Grants Council since it started and have done a lot of grants work across the ecosystem. So I'm real excited about best practices and other nerdy things about grants programs.
Totally. We share that in common. I am a grants nerd myself through and through. So, we'll jump into it. In the previous episode, we jumped into the Sunnies with Benji, Carl, and Chris from Charmverse to take a look at that program that's running across Optimism. We've got this episode exploring the Superchain and the grant programs underneath it. And we're also going to be jumping into a future episode with other members of the Grants Council to talk a little bit more about that group that we all serve in. For this episode, we really want to look at this concept of downstream grant programs. And so, as many of the listeners may know, Optimism, through governance and the groups that participate in that, express their intents. And then from that, missions are formed. And then it's the job of the Grants Council to propose those missions, review the requests that come in against those missions, and then ultimately teams can propose objectives towards those missions that help to advance the vision of Optimism. A big one right now is this concept of expanding the Superchain. So Optimism offering incentives to what I term as downstream grant programs. So participants in the Superchain have expressed interest in running their own grant program that grows their ecosystem and also grows the wider Superchain ecosystem. The way that works is you've got 2 of the 3 members here on this call that review those mission requests on their merit and work with those teams to vet that and ultimately make those approvals. There were some approvals made just this week in terms of those incentives being allocated to some different ecosystem projects. So I guess maybe let's jump into that a little bit and start with maybe the announcement this week. Katie, maybe to kick us off, talk us through some of the grantees that were approved and what the qualities of those grantees were, and maybe a little bit on how that process worked.
Yeah, so I think so far we've had 6 chains that have been approved in total. So, first of all, this is a brand new program. We've never done this before. We've done the Grants Council program for this is our 4th season, but this is our first season doing the Superchain grants. And the idea is we have a budget that we can allocate to different chains within the Superchain, and then they can bootstrap their own grants program. So they apply and we review their proposal and we look at a bunch of different things. The most important things are, in order to qualify, a chain needs to be live and they need to be contributing to sequencer revenue. And the grant amount, the framework that we look at is that how much they're contributing to sequencer revenue is affects their grant amount. So a chain that's contributing a lot to sequencer revenue can request the max amount. A chain that's newly live and still kind of like getting going, we're looking for them to request a smaller amount, obviously. So that's the biggest thing. And then we look at how they have designed their grants program and how they are measuring success within their own program. So, like for the Grants Council, for example, within Optimism Mainnet, it is milestone based. So, you get a portion of the grant up front for user incentives. This is for a specific type of grant. And then when you meet those milestones, then you unlock the second portion of the grant. And so we're looking for chains to show that they've thought about like a way to do that within their own program. And then we're looking for them to give kind of like a summary of what they're hoping to achieve with their program, whether that's like an increase in TVL, users, transactions, volume, whatever. So like my advice to new chains applying is, first of all, unless your base, probably lower your grants amount. The max is 3 million, and the only chain that's going to get that has gotten that is base. And then make sure that you're really focusing on metrics and how you're going to measure the success of your program, because that's a super important part, and that's something that we've learned through years and years of I guess not that many years, but seasons and seasons, crypto years, which feels like a very long time. uh,
Totally.
in our grants programs on OP mainnet is that you need to have some sort of like accountability, and metrics based milestones are like a great way to do that. So the chains that we've seen that have applied and gotten a grant have met that criteria, and they've done like a really fantastic job of like engaging with us and incorporating feedback and just being like really communicative and yeah, just like engaged and coming up with like a great program of their own. And so our role as the reviewers is to just like help guide them through the process. And the chains that have gotten a grant so far have done a really fantastic job of creating their own grants program, and we're super happy to support them.
Nice. Paper, maybe to have you touch on that a little bit, given you've got experience working around grant programs for some time, what was that experience like for you working with these teams? What kind of feedback did you provide? And, maybe what were some of the lessons learned, through that will ultimately help to improve, this program and kind of its focus over time?
Yeah, so I think I should preface everything I say with the fact that I'm only one reviewer, and so other reviewers may feel differently or prioritize different things. So I think Katie had touched on things like milestones, and I think expanding on that and just viewing grants as a process, a repeatable process with good internal controls and oversight, and treating a grant. It has an entire life cycle. It's not just give out the money and then, maybe get a forum post 6 months later. In addition to milestones, you want to, at the end, hopefully have some kind of closeout process. And that can be as simple as just a report back from the grantee, or it could be something more in depth. But, you want to, if a grant succeeded, you want to try to understand why it succeeded and then expand on that in subsequent grants. Or if it didn't succeed, why not? Was it an issue with the grantee? Was it an issue with the process? Was it an issue with the structure of the grant? So, grants programs have to constantly evolve and iterate. So, seeing a grants program that is set up to not necessarily be perfect right out of the starting gate, but with a capacity to learn from its successes and mistakes and evolve over time, or respond to changing market conditions. Maybe they want to do a lot of stuff with infrastructure today, but then turns out, in a few months, what they really need is user incentives and the ability to be flexible or leave maneuvering room open to the grants program, I think is a positive. I personally tend to take the view that these chains probably know their specific needs better than I do. So while I do have strong opinions about what verticals are ones that I like to see money directed towards and which ones I think tend to be low return, at least for now, for this first round, this is the first time we've done this. I'm adopting the view that the chains really know better than I do, because not all of them are the same. Some of them are gaming centric, some of them are DeFi centric, some of them are KYC real world asset chains. So it's not quite the same as handing out grants for Optimism itself.
Yeah,
No,
like,
fair
we're
enough.
supposed to look at them as,
Oh,
like, their overall, like, structure of their program and not necessarily, like, the details of, like, the grant themselves. Another thing that we should touch on too is that so there's 2 types of grants within the Optimism ecosystem, and this is also true for the Superchain grants program. So there's the builder's grant and there's the user incentives. So builder's grants are locked for 1 year and they can be used for anything from like operational costs, development costs, whatever, marketing. And then the user incentive grants, those need to go directly to end users with no intervention from the project organically. So those are two different types of grants. And with the super chain, they are requesting a portion of either the lock tokens or the user incentive tokens as well. They get the whole grant upfront from us to do as they wish, but then they are responsible for allocating that in those two different ways within their own program.
got it. Totally makes sense. When you look at the eligibility criteria, you touched on it where, it sounds like these chains have some fairly basic eligibility criteria where they have to be active, online, contributing to sequencer revenue. And then you're really looking at those applications on the merit of trusting that the chain is doing what they need to do to set correct eligibility criteria for their grantees, and really, you're just looking for signs of like strength in how they're going to set up and manage the program ongoing. Is that fair to say, or is there any, kind of like introspection at that layer of the grant program in terms of like how they need to operate, how they need to allocate, or requirements they have for reporting, on those allocations back upstream, to Optimism, the wider collective?
No, it doesn't need to be prescriptive. It's just that the fact that they've thought about it, like that they're looking at like accountability measurements and kind of like how they're thinking about like reporting and like measuring the success of their grants program. But we're not like prescriptive about what that should look like. Like we have our own tools that we use within Optimism Grants Council, but we're just looking for the Superchain grantees to come up with a structure. If it's similar to ours, that's totally cool. But if they have their own ideas of what they want to do, like that's cool too. We're just like helping them kind of like define the structure of their grants program and like best practices. But yeah, in terms of a chain being live and contributing to sequencer revenue, yeah, that's just, I mean, so like if a chain like just launched and they're not really contributing the sequencer revenue yet, and they're, requesting the max, which is 3 million OP, we're going to look at that and be like, okay, well, you don't have much activity on your chain, let's like lower that. And you can always come back and ask for more, but we want to see kind of like how the grants program is doing before we give like an additional grant to the chain.
Yeah, makes sense. Paper, maybe a question for you. When you got these applications in, did you see any, information from them on how they're going to resource to running the program? Do they have teams already dedicated to grants? Do they already have a grant program and this is growing it? Do they intend to maybe decentralize through a grants council? I don't know if any of that information was shared, but maybe just some perspectives on you in terms of uh, how they plan to resource, to allocating these grants.
Well, we definitely asked them this stuff. And the answer is it depends. There was a wide variety of structures. Some of these had run grants programs before, usually through their DevCo or foundation. And then they had experienced staff that were looking to upscale what they had done in the past with more modest amounts. Others were looking to stand up a new grants program. And so there was at least one that was trying to model it very much on the Optimism Grants program with a Grants Council. Others had varying mixtures of community and company or foundation staff that would be the decision makers. Some of these councils were structured with one executive who had the final say, but with an advisory council. Others were voting. So it's a wide variety. And again, we tended to, or at least I tended to, try to be fairly agnostic so long as someone owns the responsibility. And so you know who's going to be making the decisions. So then you can come back to them if things go well or things go poorly, without trying to. These chains are, Katie pointed out, at varying points in their life cycle. So some of them have more mature communities or groups of stakeholders, and then others are not really intended to have large ecosystems anyway. So we, long way to say it depends, but we did ask for this, and I believe it's publicly and listed in all of their grants applications.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we look at.
What's the requirements for reporting back to the grants council, the collective? I mean, in the traditional grants that we give out as the council, we have milestone trackability is definitely something that we look at in the evaluation rubric, and we kind of ask, people that are submitting towards these mission requests, how are you going to track your milestones? What does that look like? Was that a similar process for each of these? And it depends as well in terms of how they're going to report back, in their milestones. Like what can the community expect to see, over the next few months as these grants start to be allocated with those programs reporting back in?
So I think we have to differentiate between, are you talking about the programs that we're giving these grants to, or the grants that they then make?
The programs that we're given the grants to.
Yeah, so milestones are structured a little differently for these. So they're, typically in the past, we've done 40% of a grant upfront with 60% that gets unlocked when milestones are met. That's not really feasible for these, because we want them to have access to the funds and they need to be able to make funding commitments. So that format didn't really make sense. So I believe all of these are 100% unlocked up front, and given to the grants program, which then in turn has to provide them either locked or unlocked with different milestone investing patterns, that are compliant with the overall Optimism Grants Council policies. So their milestones are, I think, maybe a little binding and important. That the big carrot here is that they probably want to be able to come back and also not damage their relationship with Optimism, since in the long run, the plan is for Optimism governance to eventually have increasing amounts of powers and key holding over some of these chains.
Got it. I know I've seen a lot of talk about this concept of the law of chains and just kind of how there's the shared governance model. It sounds like that wasn't something that was necessarily in scope in this round of grants, but it could be something that gets expanded in the future in terms of how the broader collective participates with these grant programs and kind of optimism proper, to help enable them, ensure kind of like shared outcomes, those types of things. Is that fair to say, Katie? I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, this is our first time doing this program. And like how we measure success of a chain's grant program is going to be like that's something that we like need to determine. But right now we're looking at how each individual chain measures success of their individual program. So like we have the same template like we do for the OP mainnet grants where there's like milestones, but those are more just like a marker. They're not like beholden to those. It's more like a kind of like a goal of what you are looking for your chain's like grant program to achieve. But in terms of the Superchain grants as a whole, we'll probably need to come up with some sort of way to measure the success of those as a whole once this season is complete. Which will be super fun to see like how it all went and like how this program, like how successful it was. Because like I said, I mean, this is like a brand new program for us that we've been doing. So it's exciting.
Maybe a mission request, to look
Yeah,
into that a little bit
totally.
further.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would totally do that mission request. That's a great idea.
There we go. You heard the alpha here first, sir, audience. No, that'd be really cool. Maybe that's something we should look into. When you kind of look forward, for the program, let's say it's 6 months down the road, paper, if you had to give just, two or three bullets on what kind of like a desired state would be 6 months down the road with the programs that, both have been given grants today for this, and new programs coming in, what would that look like to you?
So, I mean, I think kind of almost as a placeholder metric, I believe they've all been asked to track like the number of active developers. So, ideally, they all increase the number of active developers in their chains. I would also just generally like to see increase in number of users and TVL. Both are imperfect metrics. User is easy to game. TVL is notoriously mercenary. So I'm also just like the number of chains, like or the each of the chains, they're not all generalized general purpose chains. So I think it's really going to vary like chain by chain basis. Like if it's a gaming chain, like, TVL is not maybe that important. We want to see lots of activity and user acquisition. Whereas if you're, a DeFi centered chain, then, maybe activity is less important than TVL, like particularly if it's like a yield bearing, like real world asset thing. So I think we're going to have to take this on a case by case basis. And I think we're still kind of figuring it out.
Yeah, I'm just like a huge fan of anything that can be verified on chain and easily measurable. So, like, that's the beauty of crypto, right? Like, there's so much information that's available to us. So, I like to see anything that's just like on chain, measurable, TVL, transactions, users, like all that type of information because it's hard when you have programs that aren't easily measurable because you don't know the impact. And there's so much that you can do on chain that's easily measurable. So that's always my preference.
I know a big part of what we assess, as part of the grant council, at least a lot of the grants that I've seen, has been, this concept of superchain composability. And obviously, we want to see new developers coming into the ecosystem. Maybe, Katie, do you view this as something that current developers in the Optimism ecosystem, those that have been awarded grants, et cetera, this offers them new opportunities that they can explore, i.e., is there ways that we can make those builders, those developers fungible, right, between the programs that maybe we've done as Optimism proper with the Grants Council and some of these Superchain partners? Is that double counting, or are there going to be opportunities for those existing developers to jump in just as much as we want to see new ones coming in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I don't think it's like value extractive or double counting at all. I think it's like the super chain, like the grand vision is it's going to be like one chain, right? So, like, the more developers that you bring into any chain is like good for the ecosystem as a whole. And also, like, if you have developers that are building on like base and then they move over to, derive or something like that, that's a net positive for everyone. I think just the more builders that you have in general, it doesn't matter necessarily where they're building, like we're all part of the OP stack and just like one big ecosystem, so it's kind of like a net positive in my mind.
What are your thoughts on that paper? I mean, maybe from you, what are some ideas, that we could use to drive more new developers in that you'd like to see maybe some of these chains thinking about? And then, do you think that there's pathways out there from the existing grant program, the builders that we already have in Optimism that have been awarded through retro funding, the Op Grant Council, whatever it might be, to these programs? Is there ways that we can help, as a collective, facilitate those pathways versus builders having to, in some ways, like, feel their way around in the dark and hopefully find those programs?
I think my thoughts are constantly developing on this. I mean, everyone likes money, so that people like grants programs. But I think if you're a developer, it really comes back to why are you going to choose one place over another? And there's some subsidies like the code audit subsidies. I think have been a very successful program. Like that's kind of specialized and targeted at like a specific pain point. And I think if we can be more imaginative about things like that, I think that would be great. But I think offering a user base for developers to have access to is like really there's no grants program that substitutes for that. It's why so many people like to, developers like to go to base, right? There's a big audience there. Optimism, Arbitrum, Solana, like the larger chains and L2s, Polygon. Big draw is not necessarily going to be technical or financial in nature. It's going to be the fact that it's a market that they can then serve their product to, and there's not really a way to get around that. So, I think my thoughts are constantly searching around for ways to improve developer onboarding and user onboarding and ways to to put them in the same place so that they can use each other's products and benefit from each other.
I think as a builder, though, within the optimism ecosystem, there's just so much incentive. Like we have the OP mainnet grants, and now we have the Superchain grants, and then we also have the retro funding, which is like separate from what we do, but still, I mean, that's like a great. You get rewarded for the work that you've done. So there's like all these different paths for you to get rewarded for like building, which is so cool. And I mean, it's kind of like a new way to incentivize builders. And like, if I was a builder, I would definitely want to come to Optimism because there's so many different routes to get funding. Like, you can apply to get a grant to build something. And then, if whatever you're building is successful, you can then get a grant based on the performance of what you've built through retro funding. So it's really like a great ecosystem to be a part of as a builder because there's just so many different ways for you to get rewarded for what you're doing. I think it's like really awesome, and the super chain composability is like a big part of that.
You bring up a good point paper about the audit providers, and it makes me think, it's very common in the Web 2 world with AWS, Microsoft, Google GCP. They offer this concept of credits where you basically have resources that you can tap into that aren't necessarily just kind of, you're giving out tokens or you're giving them cash directly, but you're giving them credits that they can redeem towards, services that could be valuable. And so, I know that isn't the way that this program is structured today, but do you think it could be valuable to maybe consider whether it be audit providers or certain elements of infrastructure, certain service providers that have proven themselves as strong optimism superchain partners, that some of these programs could potentially tap into those resources and be provided those through incentives, but maybe it's not direct OP incentives, right? If that makes sense. So, I mean, I guess Katie, like, what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that you could maybe see as a future state that we get to?
Yeah, and it actually reminds me that we have a mission request that's similar to that with the Optimism as a venture studio. So, like, yeah, a lot of these startups, new projects have issues with like, just like the basic operational aspects of, yeah, I mean, there's like audits, marketing, just general admin, right? And so we have a mission request right now that is designed to support new projects within the Optimism ecosystem and help them with just like the general support that I mean traditionally like maybe a VC would help with, right? Like just kind of getting them going with some of like the operational setup that they need. And so yeah, I think that's great. I mean, this is kind of like if you think about it, it's just like a new way of doing like a capital formation and like support for projects is kind of like the way I think about it. So yes, I think that's definitely like a solid path forward.
And if I'm an established audit provider today, would I be able to apply to that mission request in a way that I could use those incentives to kind of bootstrap going and helping some of these downstream grant programs, or would it be a little bit different where that mission request only supports, kind of new emerging, companies and teams?
Well, I don't know that an audit provider necessarily should apply to that mission request just because we have an existing program that they can apply to be a part of. I think it's very open ended. It could be legal or accounting or other as Katie said, like all kinds of just kind of odds and ends things. If you're a founder or a builder, like you want to do your thing, like the thing that you're building, you don't necessarily want to be setting up payroll. Maybe you've never done that before. I think those are the kinds of like boring, unglamorous tasks that mission request is more geared toward. I mean, I think audit would be a good fit if there was not already an existing program for it.
Yeah, we already have like the audit program. This is for like this like boring but necessary aspects of like doing business where like a lot of these projects it's just like a couple developers, right? And it's like they have no idea how to do marketing or payroll or just like the boring like mundane things that it takes to do a business. And so this mission request is tailored to that and to help these like new projects kind of like get all the like boring admin stuff off their plate, which I think is super rad because it's like this is stuff that would normally like I said be something that like maybe like a VC firm or something would be helping them out with, but it's like a brand new way of like doing this type of thing. of like supporting projects and incentivizing.
Totally. And the audit mission request in particular came as a result of a recognition that that was a wider need, right? And something that was kind of common across, a lot of the reviews that we do, projects that we see, and even these grant programs. So, I guess the way I look at it is as more people apply to that mission request and more of those needs are surfaced and this program goes forward and you kind of see what the needs are ongoing from these grant programs, you could potentially see other mission requests that are more domain specific, pop up potentially, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, the audit one was like one of the first programs that we came out with because it's like everyone needs to be audited. Like that's a win for us too, right? It's like we want the
Hmm.
projects that are like building on OP to be audited. So yeah, that one is like a no-brainer. And then I'm sure there's other things that will come up like I mean marketing is the big one. And yeah, there's like so many different options of like how we could do this.
The opportunity is still there, right? So this is an active mission request. The first wave of these programs has been announced. If you're a Superchain grant program, maybe kind of or a Superchain partner, maybe Katie, walk us through the process if you're interested in applying. What does that look like, and maybe some considerations that way as you put the application together.
Yeah, definitely. So the program goes until I believe the last date to apply is November 6th or 5th. I'd have to double check, but it goes until November. So, and like I said before, the requirement for a chain to get a grant is to be live and contributing to sequencer revenue. And you want to make sure that your request is proportional to the amount of sequencer revenue that you're contributing and also how long you've been live. And you can submit your application anytime and it'll get slotted into whatever review cycle we're in. And I would just say to be very like aware and like check in on your application and look for like feedback and engage with the reviewers. There's three of us. It's Paper and I and then Jack who's not here. So there's only three of us. And yeah, so we give feedback throughout the process. The things that I would say to focus on the most is just like the amount, the metrics, and how you're thinking about like accountability within your grants program, and then the overall goals of your program and what you're hoping to achieve in the long term and how you're going to report that. Yeah, I think that covers it. We've gotten some like really great proposals, and everyone we've worked with so far has been fantastic to work with, and it's been a really great experience. And yeah, looking forward to more awesome applications from these chains.
Totally. As we close out, papers, or anything you would add to that in terms of, I know you mentioned a little bit in the episode already, but what you're looking for as those applications come in and maybe advice that you would give to applicants?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really like give people advice on the merits of their application because it's not our job to write them for them. But I think to kind of like tack on to what Katie was saying about applying, I would encourage any Superchain members that if you have an application that's 95% done and you're just trying to figure out one or two more things, usually I would recommend you just go ahead and submit because there's going to be a fair amount of, you should expect some back and forth of questions, suggestions, clarifications for these anyway. And so I don't think that you're served by trying to make it perfect because I promise you we're going to find something about it to nitpick or ask about anyway. So if you are 95% of the way done, go ahead and submit it, I think, in most cases.
I appreciate you both jumping on today. Thank you so much for the time and walking through this. It was great to pick your brain, on this topic. And stay tuned for the audience. We have more episodes coming up around optimism in the Grants Council. Sometime next week, we'll be airing another episode with a few other Grant Council members, and looking forward to discussing more there. A little bit about how that process works with missions and intents, and some of the work that the team here on this call and others do. So thank you both for the time. It's been great chatting.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.